Ian, and thank WCA for hosting this event. It will allow us to share some knowledge sharing on CBAM, EU CBAM implications on cement industries. I will start. I'm Mostafa Elrakhawy. I'm Business Growth and Project Director at A³&Co. I will start my presentation showing you how we deal with the whole decarbonization, complete decarbonization solution at A³&Co. It is somehow similar to what CBAM already implement. We always prefer to start with baseline, which is identifying the CO2 emission of a cement industry. And then after identifying this baseline, we to know how much is the cement plant CO2 per ton clinker or per ton cement, and then we try to identify with the cement plants some measures to mitigate and to reduce this CO2 in the long term and in the short term through some projects. We of course prioritize the cost reduction projects for the cement plant, and then come the cost added projects as well. All of this is usually done with the cement plants in a complete decarbonization road mapping and strategy. And we are trying to support the cement plants with the suitable OEMs, EPC contractors, as well as carbon management institutions, which will help cement plant also to have. We are looking at this decarbonization approach not only as a risk, since it's a risk, and it is also an opportunity for the cement plants to reduce its costs as well. So I already then speaks on that, thanks to him and Ian as well. What is CBAM, or what is the objective of CBAM? And from Dan's presentation, it will not be limited to the EU. Thanks to him, he clarifies this. So any cement company which is exporting clinker or cement or any cement good should look at CBAM as a measure that it should work on it as soon as possible, because it will be implicated in other several countries as well. That's for sure. So the main aim of the CBAM is to prevent carbon leakage, as Dan illustrated in his presentation. And the CBAM is a mirror of the European Union emission trading system. And the aim of the CBAM is to contribute, of course, to decarbonize globally and to reaching climate neutrality by 2050. The CBAM is a part of the EU Green Deal, so this is important. As also was said in the previous presentation from Dan, CBAM is divided into two phases. Now we entered as of 1st of October 23, we entered into the transition phase, which the companies will not pay for CBAM certificate or for the taxation up to January 2026, but they should. But any exporter should start reporting his carbon emissions for the quantity of goods imported, of course, to the EU. And during the transition period, as it is a learning curve for the non-European installations and operators, the cement plants or the cement companies will report on a quarterly basis. They will report their total embedded direct and indirect emissions, and it will come in our presentation. Also, CBAM takes into consideration the carbon price in the country of origin. So, for example, if we are in Turkey or Algeria or Saudi Arabia or in Egypt, paying for a carbon tax, when we report our emission, we should report also our carbon taxation, which we are already paid. So it will be deducted from the CBAM certification afterwards, CBAM certificates afterwards. So post-transitional phase in starting January 2026 and onwards, also these reports should be verified. It should be very detailed reports. It is already very detailed reports, and it should be verified by accredited EU verifier. And the companies will start paying for their CBAM for their carbon emissions, extra carbon emissions. So what is CBAM? What is the scope of CBAM? CBAM scope currently for counting for the cement industry, it will take into consideration scope 1 direct emissions, which is process emissions, and as well as fuel emissions, combustion emissions for the kiln fuels and non-kiln fuels also as well. Also, it will take into consideration also companies should report their indirect emission, which is electricity consumed from outside the company if the company is not producing its electricity by itself. In addition to scope 3 indirect emission, which applies only on complex goods, and complex goods means that if we are using in the production of our final good, which is imported, any of the CBAM goods. So, for example, if I'm a grinding station and purchasing my clinker, so the clinker is a CBAM good, I should add the clinker emission in my cement calculation as well. All the clinker indirect emissions in that case. As Ian and Dan illustrated in their previous slides, that the European Union emission trading system has now a free allocation or free allowance of 693 kilograms CO2 per ton of clinker. And starting from 2026, as Dan was mentioning, up to 2034, the allowance will start to decrease until the allowance will 100% took off in 2034. So what is the impact on cement industry? What is the impact on cement industry from this? As we speak now, the European Union average clinker CO2 is 811 kilograms CO2 per ton clinker. And it's expected to decrease with the measures in 2034 to 760 kilograms CO2 per ton clinker as well. And the European Union allowance now is around $80, 80 to 90 euros, sorry, per ton of CO2. And our projection is much more or less than what Dan projected. In 2034, we project it will reach only up to 140 euros per ton CO2. Currently, the cement plants is paying carbon cost. Cement plants inside Europe, of course, is paying carbon cost added to its normal cost around 9 to 10 euros per ton, and expected this number to increase to around 97 euros per ton of CO2 emission in 2034. So this implications on if we consider constant EBITDA margin, this will affect the cement price, which is currently 90 euros, from 90 to 110 euros per ton. This will be affected to increase to around 200 115 euros per ton in 2034. Okay, what is cement plant should start do now? The European Commission and tax authorities um, put several regulations and several guidelines on how cement plants should calculate their emissions to be complied with CBAM. So first thing is to first for monitoring, reporting, and verification purpose, there is a lot of guidelines for this. So first step is to define the installation boundaries and the production process and production routes of the cement plants. Second step is to define the reporting period. And third step, to identify all the parameters you need to monitor these emissions. And the last step is to determine the methodology to monitor of each parameter have been identified. I will go through these 4 steps quickly. So step 1, defining the installation boundaries. It is mainly the installation boundaries is starting from the cement plant gates. All the input raw materials should be accounted for. All the input fuels should be accounted for. I will show an illustrated example in the next slides. As well as in that case, we can define the boundaries either as one production process or several production processes. So for example, producing here, for example, it is divided to 2 production processes, the cement. So all the input materials are limestone, other minerals and fuels, HFO, coal, gypsum, and the electricity, of course. Here it is defined to 2 production processes. So out of the first production process, cement clinker is produced. Out of the second production process, 1 cement type is produced. And as then illustrated, each cement clinker has a CN code, and and cement types also have separate CN codes, which the reports should identify these good codes. So what is the mechanism? The mechanism is to after defining the process, define the inputs to each process, and from each of these inputs, there is an emission factor, which is the quantity of this input, either it is raw material or fuel or electricity, multiplied by its emission factor to know how much emission you already released or produced per each ton of clinker or cement produced. So second step is the reporting period. In CBAM, the reporting period is normally 12 months. It's similar to the ETS system. And normally, CBAM is taking into consideration the calendar year. In some cases, cement plant can justify taking into account the physical year if it will be more accurate and to avoid incurring unreasonable costs in that cases. This period of 12 months is considered representative because it reflects all seasonalities or maintenance activities done in any month. So you cannot find, if you are reporting monthly, for example, you cannot find 1 month is peaking high and other months is not on that. So the reporting of 1 month is much more representative and accurate, and prevent also any data gaps in the reporting system. In order to start, as already the CBAM starts from 1st of October 23, and the reports deadline for the importers should be submitted by 31st of January. Cement plants should start to collect all 23 data, all the year data, and to start reporting its data, its collective emission data, and then also specify the amount of goods imported in each period to the EU in their reports as well. To make all this, the MRV system should be, each cement plant should have its MRV system, monitoring system as a beginning. So the monitoring system, of course, we are calculating all what I said in the calculation is a calculation-based method. There is another method, measurement-based method, which is not implemented in cement plant, and the measurement-based method is to have online emission, CO2 emission monitoring on the stacks, which is not available and not accurate in the cement plant. So the calculation-based method needs a monitoring system to identify all the way feeders, fuel counters, electrical counters, and put for them a specific monitoring plan. And there's guidelines, of course, to make this monitoring documentation to be sure that your data is completed, accurate, and specific. This monitoring should be for, as we said before, the direct emission and the indirect emissions. And the last step is to determine the monitoring methodology. Also, the determination of the monitoring methodology is to identify the frequency of the data collected, the frequency of the calibration and validation of the data, and each step of monitoring this data. This is an example, as I said to you, here in this example, the clinker, the process was divided into four production processes, not even two. And this is a screenshot from the official CBAM reporting tool. You will identify your production process. So here, for example, there's four production process, which is one, its output is clinker OPC, and another production process is SEM1, the third one is SEM2, and the last one is SRC. And with their codes, what is the direct emission for each of these products in a specified cement plant, and as well as indirect emission and the total emission, and of course the tool is containing what is the emission factors you are using, what is your biogenic content in fuel, for example, if you have any. And it is a very specified tool, and also contains a carbon price you are paying, if you are paying any carbon price in your original country. What we can do for CBAM at AQ, we are providing gap analysis for cement plant activities. Again, it's CBAM requirements, as well as calculating the related emission as per the CBAM guidelines, as I showed to you before. Preparing CBAM reports for the transitional period requirements, and preparing the MRV document as well as advising on mitigation actions to reduce CBAM price post 2026, including projects supports, identifying each project's capex and opex and its impact on carbon, on CO2 abatement as well. We also sharing some knowledge on CBAM administration with our clients, and advising our clients on CBAM organizational and responsibility requirements. Thank you. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Dan.
So without further ado, Ivica, we'll turn to you. So Ivica is here representing the EU, and maybe Ivica, you could just introduce yourself and give us a brief sort of view from your standpoint, a brief view of CBAM, and then we'll get to the discussion shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. I hope you hear me clearly.
Very clear. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for your invitation, first of all. And yeah, my name is Ivica Orlovic. Recently joined the CBAM team in Digitaxu, Unit C2. And I'm here in charge for the CBAM in technical perspective. So I will, in few 5 to 10 minutes, maybe explain a little bit just the general context of the CBAM, but most of this also was already covered by colleague before, Mostafa. And so first of all, the context of the CBAM is of course the European Green Deal and of course Fit for 55 package with the two main objectives. First objective is climate neutrality, that's until 2050, and second objective and the new target is the 2030 target to reduce GHG emissions for 55%. That's the main target and main context. The aim very well addressed by Mostafa, and prevents, first of all, carbon leakage, also to contribute to the decarbonization globally, to reach this one of these goals, that's climate neutrality, but also 2030 for the 55 in the sense of EU, and it complements and reinforce the EU ETS. And the main thing is how we would do this. We will do this. We are mirroring EU ETS or carbon pricing, EU carbon pricing mechanism, and we are addressing to the companies, not to countries, but actual carbon content of imported goods. So we also aligning with the EU's international policies and legal commitments, including, of course, WTO compatibility. We are focusing on the carbon-intensive sectors, which I will mention after all, which sectors are covered by the CBAM, and taking account, of course, carbon price effectively paid by third country or operator. So the sectors in the scope are cement, iron, steel, aluminium, fertilizers, electricity, and hydrogen. These sectors are selected on the basis of three main criteria. First is high risk of carbon leakage. Second is covering large share of greenhouse gas emissions of the EU ETS sectors. And third one is the practical feasibility. Of course, there's some exclusions here, and the main exclusion here is a adjustment under value under 150 euros. Also, there's exclusion of the countries which are linked to the EU ETS. That means Switzerland and EEA countries. In the future, of course, the scope may be extended to the limited list of ETS sector at the risk of carbon leakage, such as refineries and chemicals, provided that such extension is justified based on these mentioned selected criteria. I will not go. I will not mention these steps that already not repeat by Mostafa. These steps for determining embedded emissions, but he clearly defined it and explained it. So we are now in the middle of transitional period. There's a gradual implementation of CBAM. 2023, we are starting monitoring and reporting. So 1st of October, we started a transitional period. Transitional period will take place until the end of 2025, and the definitive period starts 1st of January 2026. So, but in meantime, in 2025, there's in line with CBAM regulation, there's a plan of review of the CBAM regulation. So in that sense, assessment feasibility proportionally of the scope extension post 2026, including to a limited set of EU ETS sectors that I just mentioned, selected number of downstream products which contain a high share of basic CBAM goods, indirect emissions, impact on the other countries with low GDP, and progress in international climate discussions that's going on already. In 2026, we are starting definitive period, as I said, and we are starting gradual phase in of the CBAM and phase out of the free ETS allowances. So as Mostafa explained, by ratio, that's through the 8 years until 2034. Of course, in that sense, Commission provided a lot of informations on our one-stop shop website. There's a lot of information over there. There's a trainings like e-learning and webinars for specific and general specific for each sector. There's also guidance documents that we are just in the middle of updating this guidance document, and in a few days we will update it also. So there's a guidance document for producers in third countries and reporting declarants. There's also templates, Excel-based template to facilitate data collection and information exchange between operators and declarants. There's also, of course, as you know, we published CBAM Transitional Registry, and you can find reporting interface and the link on our website. Also in the user manuals for declarants for the CBAM registry. CBAM registry, as you know, just to shortly explain, this is electronic platform in which you will submit your CBAM reports. So everything is on our dedicated information portal, information website that you can find it. Maybe a little bit more about transitional period, just to tackle this about reporting activities. Objective of transitional period, of course, transitional period is learning phase for all of us, understanding roles and tasks, collection informations, and facilitate smooth rollout of mechanism after 2025. The information collected will be allowed European Commission to further specify, will be allowed us to further specify the finalized methodology and define synergy with existing monitoring schemes. And as I said, information collected will be feed for review the mechanism by 2025. Also, in this sense, we provided several flexibilities with the aim to introduce openness and balancing a smooth introduction with information needs. So as you know, CBAM report containing the following: the total quantity of goods imported during the preceding quarter. So reports will be quarterly based, but on the yearly based data. Total embedded emissions, direct and indirect emissions. The carbon price due in the country of origin for the embedded emissions. It's clearly said here that during the transitional period, there's no financial obligations and there's no verification of emissions by the EU accredited verifier. Also, there's no obligation to, of course, there's financial, and there's no obligation to submit CBAM certificates. So maybe just to tackle about these flexibilities until 31st of July for each imported goods, which the reporting declarant does have all information, of course. The reporting declarants may use default values. Default values will, for the goods, will be published until the end of this month for sure, but in a few days, I hope, and will be right on time before reporting period, which starts 1st of January 2024. Until the end of 2024, there is a possibility and flexibility to use other monitoring reporting methods, but if they lead to similar coverage and accuracy. And of course, without time limit, there's a possibility to estimate up to 20% of total embedded emissions of complex goods. This includes also default values. So entire whole period, transitional period, you can use these estimations. So that's a basically a short introduction, maybe, that I want to share with you with the main things maybe interested for stakeholders here. Thanks, Jan. Back to you.
I'd like to invite anybody who has questions to put them in the chat, and as I say, we'll invite you here to participate in the discussion. Ivica, can I just start with you? And one of the things that is very striking is that the penalties for not reporting are quite significant. And the requirement is to start reporting in January. Do you foresee the EU being a little flexible in the initial implementation of these rules, or do you think there really is a risk of the kind of penalties that are incorporated being applied right from the beginning?
Yeah, in this sense, for sure, there will be flexibilities, especially from beginning, because these penalties are here only for those who will not submit at all. I mean, at all these reports. So for sure, there will be flexibility from beginning. For us, it's important to establish a system. That's the most important. So for sure, flexibilities from beginning will be, but we need this data. That's for sure. We need this data to evaluate, to proceed to the definitive view. Yes, thanks.
Okay. I think that everybody will be well, not everybody, at least the guys who want to import will be relieved to know that that's the case. So Fabien, you posed a couple of questions, and you have a slightly different perspective from many of the participants here, because of course you're already importing clinker into the EU for processing your plants. And I think you made a point about the question of who is responsible here, the exporter or the importer. But I also, if I understood correctly from what you were saying, Mostafa, there's a requirement if you're importing that the plant that you're importing from has to also satisfy some requirements. So Fabien, perhaps you could just explain your understanding of how that works.
Yes, thank you, Jan. Yes, we understood that the main obligation rely on the importing company rather than on the exporting company. So that's why I put a question for them, because he stressed the obligation for the exporting company, but for me, the main obligation is for the importing company.
Mostafa, on your slides where you were showing the methodology, you were focused on the exporting plant. So how do you see those two coming together?
First of all, until now, the registry system, thank you, Ivica, for illustrating the registry importer who will, all the obligations, from my understanding, is the importer who will report the data. The importer here will take the data from the installation outside of the EU. So if I'm cement producer outside the EU and Fabien is the importer, I'm exporting to him. He will take from me the data and he will register the operator data. Until now, this is my understanding. I cannot see the operator cannot enter the registry portal, or up to my knowledge, of course. Yeah, I'm not expert in registry model, but this is up to our knowledge that the importer, he will be the responsible, and the installations outside EU should pass its data to the importer. I see Dan and Ivica also have answers.
Yeah.
They can support them.
Dan, come to you first.
Ivica, you could go first.
Ivica, did you want to add something there?
Thanks, Dan. Yes, correctly. Yeah, CBAM declarant or declarants are responsible for the ETA, and yeah, they're the one who bears the responsibility for ensuring the completeness and correctness of the CBAM reports. That's correct. Yes. Also, they are also reporting declarant is liable and may be subject to these penalties that you just mentioned. But of course, as I said from beginning, there's a lot of flexibilities. They can introduce default values. That's the most important until it's true until 31st of July 2024. So there's a lot of flexibilities that can be used. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. Dan, did you want to add anything?
Might be briefly beneficial for me to share my screen to discuss a bit more about how this works. So right now you're looking at a small little roadmap of the transitional period obligation. So if I am a importer into the EU and I have a it's called part of my operation already established in the EU, I could either be the direct customs representative representing myself or use an indirect customs representative. So there's a bit of flexibility. I do want to mention that it does change on during the definitive period where we introduce the authorized declarant. So there is a bit of movement between the transitional period and the definitive period on this topic. And I also wanted to briefly touch on something that we do and we've already done is we've shifted the obligation from companies to other organizations. So we work with importers, exporters, traders. So if I'm trading clinker, for example, am I responsible? You know, if I'm importing clinker, am I responsible? That question of responsibility is one that's tough to define. So something that potentially you could do is, depending on contractual agreements, you could shift the obligation of CBAM onto other counterparties. Again, it's hard to talk about that quickly in a 10-minute or 2-minute answer, but that is an option that we have explored before. So depending on who is responsible is going to be down to contractual agreements. Specifically, we've seen some of our counterparts in Asia explore this route. So it opens up Pandora's box of different ways to mitigate that risk.
Okay. No, I think that sort of clears up how it works. Philippe, I thought you raised an interesting point here about other cementitious products, about fly ash and slag. So maybe you could pose that question.
Yeah, the question is about, will, products such as slag, fly ash be subject, to the CBAM as compared to clinker or cement, for instance, right? Because it's still a byproduct, but it comes, from a process. So what is your view on this?
So Dan, I see you answered that online. Do you just want to repeat that, and Mostafa, then we come to you?
Defined between what's called a complex good and a simple good. So a simple good is something, a type of product that the EU has defined has 0 embedded emissions in it, and therefore it would fall outside of the production process for that good. A complex good, on the other hand, is something that would include CBAM exposure. So when we consult companies, we've done a few presentations of our own trying to walk people through this step by step. The European Commission has provided some production processes which show what are simple good and what are complex goods. To answer your question specifically, the products you mentioned would indeed fall outside. So for simple goods, they would be exempt. Fly ash and slag, for example. Same with gypsum or limestone. So I guess that potentially answer your question. I'm happy to send you over some information after this specifically on this topic. There are a specific list when we talk about cement of products that are defined as simple goods and products that are defined as complex goods. So I'm happy to share that with you after this, if you'd like.
So in other words, a waste material would be exempted in general?
Waste material as in, can you give me an example of it?
For example,
Yes.
Shredded tires, or this kind of material, which
are consumed, by cement manufacturing plants,
That would be exempt from my knowledge. But
Mostafa,
with that being said, I'd like to, if I could see the exact production process you were speaking of, then I could cross-reference the documents from the EC.
It's a waste, right? I'm talking about waste, basically,
waste,
right? Like petcoke, for instance, right? Which is
yes, that would be exempt.
Waste as a fuel, tires or RDF or SRF. The waste as a fuel will be calculated with its emission factor, and you should take for this waste the biogenic content of this waste, because the biogenic content will not be counted in your emission. And for the fly ash and slag, as Dan said, same answer. It is not under the complex good, as of my knowledge also. So it is production material. Same applies to limestone or gypsum. We are not counting its embedded emission or indirect emission in CBAM, at least during the transition period until now.
And does that apply, Mostafa, even if it's imported as a blended cement?
Yes,
it does.
At the end, the product is blended cement.
Yeah.
It contains fly ash or slag.
But it's not counted. The fly ash and slag in the blended cement is not counted.
It is not. Its emission is not counted. It will get at the end for this cement product a lower emission factor for this cement product, because it reduces the clinker inside the cement. It will reduce the amount of clinker.
What about, the emissions, related to shipping?
So
No.
transport within the transition period is exempt. And so, but with that being said, depending on the route and as well as what type of ship, it could be included in the EU ETS shipping scheme, which will be expanding on the 1st of January 2024 at 50%. So CBAM as of right now excludes emissions caused from transport. It is something that could be expanded, again, but per Article 30, it mentions transport as potentially expanding, but right now it's not included.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Nabil, can I come to you? You had asked a number of questions. Maybe we could kick off with your question on white cement, because I think that's an interesting one that nobody has raised.
Yes. First, allow me to thank all our colleagues, presenters of today. I had a couple of questions. The first question is, I noticed in Mostafa's presentation that there is no differences between gray and white cement, which is really, I don't know, somehow strange for me. Production of gray cement by any means is a specific heat consumption is higher than the gray cement. So it's not fair somehow. This is part one of the question. Part two is the calculation itself. I think 693 is a very challenging figure for all the figures and the scopes that would be covering. I assume at the moment it's not easy to get it. So the question is, is it gross or not? Because this is very important. Probably in your answer, Mostafa, right now you answered part of the question, which is calculation of the waste for assumption RDF as an alternative fuel. It has emission factor which is higher than coal, even, as you know, or petcoke. So this will be negatively counting. It will not be a good, let's say. It's not an intensive for usage of high TSR depending on RDF, for example, which is very strange again, because again, if it is gross, you will only need to deduct the biomass content. Correct me if I'm wrong, please. So that's all from my side, and thank you for today.
Thank you. Mostafa.
Yes. First question for the white and gray cement. In the presentation, I'm saying that both have the same, not the same emission factor, both have the same method of calculating its emission. Same method applies. What applies to gray cement applies to white cement. So of course, because of higher heat consumption, the emission of white cement will be much more higher of course, at the end. Second question concerning the RDF or waste fuels. Yes, biogenic content is essential. You should identify the biogenic content. And for RDF, for example, containing plastic, you can expect around 30% biogenic content, which will give you the emission factor at the end. If you are saying the emission factor of RDF is 110 and the emission factor of coal is or pet coke is 90 something, 92, 97, this 30% reduction of biogenic factor will, of course, lie under the coal or pet coke. So the TSR will help companies to reduce. Last thing, Hamad was asking also about the I forgot biogenic content and the TSR and the white and gray cement, I think.
Yeah, I'm sorry, on the net and gross, so the figure of 690.
Yes, gross figures. Yeah, so yes, it's gross figures. No.
Okay, thank you. So I think one of the things that's interesting to think about is what the implication of all of this is going to be on cement demand, and or specifically on clinker demand. I mean, I think really that's specifically what we're talking about. And Fabian, I wanted to ask you a question related to this. I mean, it seems to me that we might see a very significant increase in the price of clinker, let's put it that way. Obviously, eventually the price of cement, but the price of clinker. And that might lead to changes in the market. But I wondered also if there are any, or if you're thinking about any possibility that some of your suppliers might have access to energy, to natural gas, for example, in Algeria, at a sufficiently low price that they could afford to carry out CCUS at a much lower cost than the carbon price. Is that something that is factoring into your thinking?
Okay, it's quite difficult to forecast what will be the future in this field because you have several different possibilities of evolution of this market of clinker manufacturing and clinker exporting. I am not sure that the implementation of the CBAM will put pressure and increase the price of clinker, because as we said, the financial burden will be on the importer of the clinker. So normally, the importers will take into account this cost of clinker, and this will impact, as we said during the conference, the sales price of cement. But normally, there should not be a pressure to increase the price of clinker, because the exporter, the producer of clinker, who export to the EU, will not have a difference in the cost for its clinker. First of all, secondly, there will be a competition between the clinker exporters, because the ones that will be able to reduce the carbon emission of the clinker will have a competitive advantage toward the ones that will not be able to decrease the carbon content of their clinker. Would it be thanks to biomass? Would it be thanks to improving the production process and decreasing the energy consumption of the kiln? And finally, would it be through CCUS? And it's true that in 10 years from now, if you have producers with CCUS, they will have a terrific competitive advantage towards the ones that won't have this technology. But basically, I'm not sure that all these factors will increase the price of clinker.
Yeah. Okay. You're distinguishing there on the clinker price and, if you like, the clinker cost once you've got it into the EU. And I take your point there. Mostafa and Dan, you both had a comment here. If we can come to you both quickly on this one, and then we'll just have a look through the questions that we haven't answered. So, Mostafa?
Yes, I'm not totally agree with Fabian that it will not increase the cost of clinker. It will be different because some of the technologies used to reduce carbon, as you said, the carbon will be the competitive advantage. We are talking carbon now. As a cement producers, carbon is a competitive advantage of the cement producer. Some initiatives and some decarbonization initiatives, yes, will reduce manufacture cost, but it will require from him some capital investments, as you said, to increase alternative fuels or to use SCMs, hydrogen fuels, for example, even before CCUS, which is not so matured until now, and its cost is very high. So any technology will be implemented, will increase the cost of manufacture and reduce the CO2 emission, which we are talking, it will be we are selling, most of producers will be selling much more CO2 than selling even cement or clinker. Almost carbon cost is equal to cement cost.
Yeah. Okay. So, and Dan?
I'll make it quick because I know we're short on time. Perhaps to answer your question, it's good to discuss that this topic isn't necessarily black and white, and that there's a lot of opaque gray in between. One of the very common things we do with our clients is we look at various suppliers, various jurisdictions, and how the EU CBAM will impact them differently. If I say we have Algeria, Morocco, and Turkey, and if we look in 2027, what is the CBAM cost going to be between those jurisdictions, and how are they different? Because the answer is quite surprising. And so if I'm an importer, if I'm prudent, and I want to buy, continue to have competitive, good, cheap clinker coming in, well, I need to understand how the EU CBAM is going to impact every installation in my supply chain potentially, and every jurisdiction differently. That's something that, of course, we can help with. But to answer your question on if clinker will increase in price, I think we have to understand a few caveats beforehand, such as where it's coming from, how it's being made, and a handful of other criteria. But again, we're short on time, so I want to, yeah.
Thanks, Dan. So just looking at the questions that we haven't got to, there's one here from Abdulkader Rashwani, who's based in Turkey, and he asks, what is the advice for Turkey? Is LC3 considered a solution? Mostafa, do you want to answer that one?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Abdulkader asks, what is the advice for Turkey? Is LC3 considered one of the potential ways of reducing?
Calcined clay is a complex good. So calcined clay is a pre-sequers, they are named in the CBAM. So if we are importing calcined clay, calcined clay as a material, it will lies under CBAM. If it is used in cement, calcined clay cement, LC3 or whatever, is as a percentage, we should count its embedded emission also, because calcination process have some emissions. It should be counted.
But it will be much less than clinker.
It will be much less. It will be much less than clinker. Yeah. As a final product, it will be much less.
Okay. One here, Dan, for you. Do you think CBAM similar mechanisms might be considered for exports to African countries?
From as of right now, there are only 2 countries within the African continent that are having direct responses to the EU CBAM. So perhaps it's a bit too early to say if other countries are going to be responding. The last time I checked, there are 37 different countries that are talking about introducing legislation to protect their exports to the EU to maintain competitiveness. within Africa. That's Egypt and Morocco are the countries that legislation they're even speaking about. Nothing is rubber stamped, but we're anticipating further to come. Yeah.
Okay. Yep, thank you. Ivica, a question I'd like to throw at you. What will happen after 2038 when EU producers are not allowed to emit at all and need to have a CCUS facility in place, which obviously has very large capex implications? Can importers still just pay the CBAM price? Is that still going to be available in 2038?
Yeah, thanks, Jan, for this. It's quite hard now to say anything for even definitive period, even after 2038. That's hard to predict right now. We are focused more on transitional period and collect the data, and then after analyzing this data, we will be, let's say, smarter.
Okay.
So it's hard for me to say anything for definitive period right now.
I mean, I think it's a question. You know, there are an awful lot of things that could happen by 2038. So, which could affect the not just the costs in the market, but also the demand. Because, of course, when you make clinker a lot more expensive, it also gives a big opportunity to alternative materials. And I think we're going to see some big changes in the way that concrete is made in Europe in particular. We've got a question from Ismail here. Maybe some clinker producers do not want to pay carbon tax and they will not export clinker to the EU. I think that's certainly going to happen given the reporting requirements. Some companies will choose not to export to the EU and will concentrate on other export markets. So, of course, the implication there is that you might have a little bit more competition in those other export markets, and they may see prices decline there.
I have an answer to this question also.
Yeah.
As Dan said in his presentation, it is not limited to EU. It will be spread out.
Yes.
So cement producers should consider reducing their carbon emission to be competitive in the export market if they are looking generally on export market. Because after EU, it will come in US, it will come in even maybe in Africa as well. African plants grants in Africa is linked to carbon emission now, and of course it will come.
Dan, did you have something different on that, or?
Just wanted a great comment. As we speak, there are CBAM consultations going on in the US, in the UK, in Australia, South Korea, and even some conversations unofficially happening in both India and China. So this EU CBAM will not be an EU CBAM for a while. It will be a global CBAM in different jurisdictions. And so if you do not choose to export into a market with the CBAM, the markets available in the coming years will be quite slim, potentially.
Okay. There's a question here from Sean Donaghy, and maybe Ivica, this is one for you to start with. Does the exclusion of indirect emissions on several electro-intensive products, brackets beyond cement, of course, risk competitiveness of European producers or put non-EU producers at a competitive advantage? So I think, is this about the exclusion of the electrical emissions?
I'm not quite sure what it means about several electro-intensive products. Is it?
I think it might be steel,
related to electricity?
Aluminum.
Is it related?
I'm happy to jump in if you'd like.
Yeah, Dan.
So out of the 6 sectors, a handful of them, such as aluminum, such as steel, are excluding of indirect emissions. Now let's take aluminum. Aluminum is incredibly electric intensive to create. Now with the exclusion of indirect emissions for aluminum, I believe the question is saying that how will that impact competitiveness? That is, one of the topics that is currently being discussed quite intensely in the European Commission on if during the definitive period they will be including indirect emissions for just steel and aluminum. If we look to the UK consultation, as of right now, it's not been officially announced, but they are including, anticipating to include indirect emissions for all sectors. So I would take a stance that as of right now, my personal opinion is once the definitive period comes online, the European Commission would likely take a second look at including indirect emissions for those electric intensive sectors. And I would potentially lean with the rhetoric, especially from David Babioli, that indirect emissions would be included. I'm happy to send some information specifically from what David mentioned. He's, I call him the chairman of architect to CBAM. He's mentioned on indirect emissions later on, if you'd want to hear.
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks, Dan. Thanks, Dan, on this explanation. Yes, as I said from beginning of my introduction, the scope will be reviewed 2025. The scope of the indirect emissions also will be reviewed just before definitive period. So yes, thanks again, Dan.
Okay, thank you. So I think we have covered the questions here that have not been answered online. So thank you to Dan, thank you to Mostafa, thank you to Ivica, thank you to all of you for participating. Laurence, nice to see you. And
Thanks a lot.
I wish you a good day.